I always thought the devil was a metaphor for profoundly immoral and malevolent happenings. Hello everyone, welcome to the Before I Turn Discography Ranking. I discovered Before I Turn in 2018, back when Claustrophobic was releasing. It instantly became a favorite of mine and cemented my love for concept albums. Being able to tell a story through the combined measure of music and lyrics, somehow both together and separate, is a skill just as any other form of storytelling. Before I Turn has made the very idea of a concept album one of the key characteristics of their place within the music scene, molding a key northeast metalcore sound to the stories Alex writes, and it has always been a compelling offer to me. Not every release is that of a concept, and one of them is a bit more vague in the way the concept permeates its identity, but still, it is by far the thing that I love the most about this band. Recently, the third and probably final chapter of the Claustrophobic storyline, comprising the band's 2018, 2020, and now 2026 album releases, has released. I think now is as good a time as any to finally do a discography ranking, another one on the channel, and talk about Before I Turn's career. Coming in at 7th place will be the Sigma Sessions, released in 2025. I do not recommend the Sigma Sessions. I gave this a 1.5 out of 5. Normally, I wouldn't be inclined to include a remix album or EP in a discography ranking in the first place, and to be fair, I am debating doing so now. I just didn't enjoy this and don't really think it's worth talking about very much, because I'm not really much of a remix person in the first place. There's technically an original couple of tracks here, but one of them is more a collection of previous ideas smashed together in a medley sort of format, and the other is the only real standout, given that it's a new Before I Turn song, but it's not really notable enough to go out of your way for. Unless you love remixes, I don't really recommend checking out this release. Even a year separated from its release, it doesn't do anything for me personally. The only standout track is Counting Seconds, the one deeply original track. In 6th place will be the band's debut EP, Imposter, from 2015. I recommend Imposter for the morbidly curious. I gave it a rating of 2.5 out of 5 when I recently re-listened to it on the 25th of February, and I did this entire discography re-listen on the 25th of February. I think this EP is the only thing the band has put out that Alex low-key tries to separate himself from. Not that it's super bad or inherently embarrassing, but it's certainly not special either, nor does it really do much to make the band stand out. To be fair, it is a debut EP, and most debut EPs in 2010's metalcore struggle from the same things, being too similar to inspirations, not forging enough of a new path or identity, relatively poor production that isn't offensive but still distracting. All in all, the EP is fine, and the unclean vocalist absolutely rocks here and brings a lot more variety than I remembered from the last time I listened to this in like 2020 or something, but you can feel a lot of the band's influences as an inherent piece of what the EP is, and that defines it the most, for better or worse. Leeches in the Grotto is a blueprint for what The Virus would do the next year, which makes sense given that I'm pretty sure a rewritten version of it appears there under the title of just Leeches. The couple of clean choruses shows Alex's potential on the EP as well. Harlot in particular, despite a messy performance, had the potential to be a classically huge Before I Turn chorus right from the start. In general, however, the riffage and overall songwriting on most of the EP fails to leave an impression besides the closer, which does actually stand out in spite of not being inherently unique, even at the time. If you're curious as to the roots of the band's sound, you might be interested in experiencing Imposter. If you don't really care that much about the humble beginnings of artists, this is by no means a must-listen, and I recommend just starting with The Virus instead, as it also defines the band's sound to come much better. Standout tracks include Leeches in the Grotto because of the way it leads into the next release, and my favorite song, which was Imposter. Next up, we'll talk about a couple of miscellaneous singles that were released in 2016 and 2017. Solitary Forever is a great debut for Alex's unclean vocal performance, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5, and I think is worth listening to. Paralysis is, however, honestly kind of annoying, and I don't think you need to check it out. I only gave that a 2 out of 5. Solitary Forever in 2016 is arguably Before I Turn's most brutal track, actually, weirdly enough. It parts a little bit from the sound that The Virus started to define them with, as it released a handful of months afterwards, but it's engaging enough for a single track. It also showcases, like I said, Alex's debut on unclean vocals incredibly well, plus seems to foreshadow some of the lyrical themes that Claustrophobic would eventually come to focus on. It's an interesting song. But Paralysis in 2017 is mediocre. It returns a bit more to a songwriting style that is a bit more typical for the band in some ways, but the decisions made with the guitars as a quote-unquote melody, whether it be string bends or whatever the heck is going on, I don't know, I'm not a guitarist, that sound is a bit annoying and make the track entire a bit too tedious to be worth checking out more than maybe once. So I recommend Solitary Forever, for if you're curious. I don't really recommend checking out Paralysis though, it's only a few minutes, but But coming in 5th place is the band's 2024 release, The Devil Exists, which I recommend and give a 4 out of 5. From a production standpoint, I think this record might be the best that Before I Turn has ever sounded in some ways, even more so than the newest record, strangely enough. The balance of the melodies and cleans and ambiance versus the meatiness of riffs and the like is absolutely on point here. It is arguably the most pleasant listening experience for that reason. Hell, the first single of the new album originally sounded more like this than it does on the final version, and I prefer that sound more, personally. But hey, why does The Devil Exist fall so low on the ranking then? 2 things. Firstly, the looser concept approach that leaves me broadly somewhat less invested in the full body of work, and 2, it takes the sound forged by Lovelorn and goes a bit more experimental in ways that sometimes didn't fully click with me. If you want to know a little bit more about my thoughts on the album when it released, I have a full-length review on the channel already, which is funnily longer than the album itself is. I think my thoughts broadly pull through, so that video is good reference. But yeah, about those 2 points, on the first note, rather than telling a complete story, The Devil Exists explores within each track a different way in which the existence of the devil is manifest in a version of the real world. Some of these are looser than others, some are better than others. Oxytocin, notably, outside of a particular lack of rhyme in one lyric, is an incredible depiction of abuse, inspired by Johnny Depp's experience with Amber Heard. Reanimate is marked by the torture of a miscarriage that Alex and his wife experienced. I've Been Searching for You is about trying to be comfortable in one's own skin. Individually, the sentiments of nearly every track just slaps, but the lack of the album being a single unit the way I'm used to with Before I Turn just kind of means it doesn't do as much for me, even if it is still great. I did give it 4 out of 5. But on the second point, Alex takes some interesting swings with this record, combining hallmarks of what the band has done with each of their 3 previous albums, such as the keyboard/synth melody in Oxytocin being an obvious callback to The Virus. In general, however, I just don't find myself truly jiving with as many moments as much as I want to compared to said past records. I can't really explain why. It's mostly a personal taste thing. I still enjoy the album a ton, but the back half kinda isn't it for me. Under the Vermilion Sun, for some reason, I just don't like very much. World Eater is a little too outside the rest of the album, and The Tailor as the closer is obviously just a 1 minute left over from when the album was being constructed as what Immoral and Malevolent Happenings eventually ended up being, and even partially features on one of the songs of that album. There are some lyrical and sonic motifs that pull the package together, however, but the entire thing isn't as for me as I wish it was. The Devil Exists is not bad by any means, but I think it's my least favorite Before I Turn album. After all, when every album is as good as Before I Turns are, one of them has to be at the bottom of the pile. Standout tracks include Beginning My Descent to Hell, my favorite song, Oxytocin, and Reanimate. In 4th place is the band's debut album, which came out in 2016, The Virus, which I highly recommend and rate 4 out of 5. If there was any more proof to the implicit criticism that Imposter lacks much oomph, the fact that The Virus came out a year later is that very thing. The prior EP doesn't even really count as a proof of concept for the band's sound. It has a single track that could be considered that proof of concept for the sound to be found here, but this album is the complete product that proves the band could actually do something that stood out. It stands out impossibly much compared to the EP. It's night and day difference. Listening to them back to back is almost whiplash-inducing. The quality surge is so insane. The keyboard melodies that define the album give the band something that comes to gird no small amount of their identity. The solid, unclean vocals keep the entire thing from being stale despite abandoning Alex's clean vocals until the very end, and the riffs are meatier and heavier. The introduced ambient elements fill out the soundscape. The rhythmic decisions, the raw quality of performance feels like it's actually aiming to achieve a tonal end rather than just throwing things together. Everything just comes together here. I always underrate this album in my head somehow. I really, really hope there's a CD release of this at some point. I have the rest of the band's discography physically, including Imposter, and the fact this is the only one that, as far as I can tell, does not exist in that format is a sin to me. Breakthrough Records, if you're watching this, please do a run of The Virus. I beg of you. Side note, if you happen to like that 2010s proclivity of certain metalcore to border on deathcore without actually going that crazy, meaning that the intensity of the songwriting and the consistency of unclean vocals with little to no clean vocals most of the time, this is a perfect rendition of that in my opinion. I wish I'd stopped forgetting how damn good this is and how impressive of a full-length debut it is, especially compared to the EP. Like, right from the beginning with the title track, The Virus is already just everything that Imposter didn't really ever manage to be. Standout tracks include The Virus, Prophets, Leeches, and my favorite song, At Your Grave. P.S. Getting Adam Warren on the rewritten version of Leeches was crazy work. I don't think I ever even realized that before this listen. P.P.S. I love how the bulk of the album expands upon the small potential that made it into Imposter, and then the last couple tracks take the sound and the lessons learned to be their own proof of concept for the eventual sound of Claustrophobic in its softer moments. Genuinely fascinating to me to see how that worked, particularly from a melodic standpoint. Alex's performance is also so much more confident here. It's like The Virus was trying to prove it could actually do heavy really well, and then it expanded upon the horizon from there, and immediately succeeded on account of the much more solid foundation. As I said, fascinating. In third place comes Immoral and Malevolent Happenings from 2026, which I highly recommend and rate a 4.5 out of 5. To tell the honest truth, there might be a bit of a couple different biases here. Recency bias, first of all. After my recent re-listen of The Virus, I'm debating switching these two albums on the list, but it feels too perfect for the whole Arthur Rose saga to compose the top 3 spots, so we'll just have to deal with it being in third place for now. Also, I edited the companion novel that came out shortly after the album came out, so take my opinion with a grain of salt here, I guess. If you're invested in the story of Claustrophobic and Lovelorn and you're paying attention, the greatest part of this album is how it completely flips our understanding of it. Just about nothing is as we originally thought, let alone how we once understood it to develop. There's something so special when a storyteller can make such radical decisions that make their story completely different, down to its very core essence in some ways, but without it being a betrayal of what it once was. Furthermore, the inspirations taken from Sweeney Todd mixed into the collective Before I Turn soundscape here is just so brilliantly executed. The heavy moments are resoundingly heavy compared to past work. The cinematic flair from Lovelorn carries through and compounds with said musical influence. The storytelling is more direct given the existence of a companion novel. The callbacks to Claustrophobic are perfectly deserved instead of merely fan servicey. There's just so much to love about this thing. If you think of it as a mix between The Devil Exists and Lovelorn with that Sweeney Todd flavor mixed in, plus the callbacks to where the story supposedly all began, you've got a very strong album package here. I'd certainly say it was worth the wait. My singular gripe is that I prefer the production of The Devil Exists. You know, the way that the original single version of And She Was Beautiful differs from the album version is the best way to see what I mean here. The album version has more stuff to it that gives it a little bit more impact, but the album sound is not precisely what I anticipated after listening to the single as many times as I did. The meatiness of the guitars and everything is a little bit too prominent in my opinion. It doesn't let the drums or the vocals breathe as much as I'd personally like, but that's my only major gripe with it. Standout tracks include my favorite song, And She Was Beautiful, Poor Soul, Oh My How They Bled, Born in Blood, and a secondary favorite track in Always Haunted. As a PS, on my first listen, I also included The Closer with the favorite label in the above list, the aforementioned standout tracks list, but this time that favorite label moved up to the penultimate track instead, and The Closer doesn't feature in the list. I instead included Born in Blood in its place. Otherwise, the list is the same. I intentionally didn't reference the other review that I did of this album prior to making this ranking, just to see how similar my standout tracks list would end up being. It's always pretty interesting, the subtle differences in what stands out between multiple playthroughs of a record, but more interesting that my list was nearly identical this time around. In second place is something that I honestly can't believe I'm saying right now. That is Claustrophobic from 2018, which I really highly recommend and rate 5 out of 5. I'm rewriting this section about Claustrophobic. You know, the narration that I'm doing here is based off of a rewritten version of this placement because I originally had Claustrophobic at number 1, and a vital piece of my soul resists every word that I write and speak here, insisting that Claustrophobic still has to be my favorite Before I Turn album. You know, this placement was the easiest to do at the start of this journey, even before I started re-listening to the albums. It's just always been my favorite one. More than that, it's a seminal and incredibly important album in my truly adoring the art of storytelling in music, both musically and lyrically. Claustrophobic is still a nigh-perfect album and has the benefit of existing as a really great standalone when interpreted differently, and I wholeheartedly recommend it as the best starting place with Before I Turn's discography. But I have to place this only in second place now, which is unbelievable to me. I'm shocked at myself. I adore this album. You know, sure, I've always had my subtle gripes with certain bits of it, like the transition from the title track into Dissociative being still very jarring, but I just can't in good conscience keep Claustrophobic at number 1 after the experience that I had with Lovelorn. Standout tracks of this album include, most of them to be honest, Agleka, Latent Perception, and Bereave as the first 3 tracks are just incredible. The train of tracks from White Lady to Don't Look Down to my favorite song on the record and one of my 2 favorite Before I Turn songs in Claustrophobic, and the final track, Crux, are all standouts. You know, as a little PS, yes, I know that's a lot of standout tracks, but I love this album, so sue me. And finally, in first place is Before I Turn's 2020 release, Lovelorn, which I really, really highly recommend, and I'm rating 6 out of 5 just because I can. You know, obviously it can only be 5 out of 5, but like, come on, you know, Claustrophobic not taking the number 1 spot in this ranking is just so crazy to me. The trouble is that I've realized that Lovelorn is a legitimately perfect album, unlike most anything else, and Immoral and Malevolent Happenings made the story of this album such that it managed to exceed in my brain and my imagination what it ever managed to do beforehand. Because before, Lovelorn was merely the follow-up to Claustrophobic that I didn't fully get the same way. But now I get it. Everything that didn't click before certainly did this time. I was still going to rate this album a 5 out of 5 back when I had it placed in second place, for example. Like, I loved it. But if I could legitimately give this album a 6 out of 5 right now, I would. And I do give it that in my heart. Coming back to this for the first time in a couple years, I had forgotten somehow just how utterly perfect this record is. While it carries every aspect of Claustrophobic that made it such a brilliant release, Lovelorn also incorporated a more actively cinematic flair that makes it impossible to not just adore. The implicit progressive factor paired with the cinematic and even lower tune / heavier appeal without letting up on the melodies, the choruses, everything else. My gosh, this recent listen was just so perfect of an experience that I cannot fathom picking favorites beyond what you'll find in the later standout tracks section. Every single one of these is one that, while it's playing, strikes as, oh hey, this might be the best one. Wait, no, maybe this is the best one. Now hang on, this one has to be the best one, actually. And it never ends. The longest, most confident, most cinematic, and most perfect Before I Turn record. I will not waste more time trying to summarize my thoughts, other than to say that the story of it is so much more striking than it ever managed to be with the context of immoral and malevolent happenings, both the album, but especially the novel. You know, in my mind, it just means so much more. Before, I had a version of this story in my head from years ago, but every single line hits so much harder now in hindsight since I know more of the story. Furthermore, the lyrics on this record are just so well done, and Alex balances the direct storytelling with the implicit storytelling in a way he never does on any of the other albums at all. They are so clear now, yet managed to be so elusive to me for so long that I can't help but respect the writing on Lovelorn more than potentially any other concept album I've ever listened to. It's that good. You know, as far as standout tracks go, I'm cheating in saying every single one of them. Seriously, I cannot stress that I can't pick standouts from the album, broadly speaking. My favorite songs are, you know, the interlude of Hang Me combined with its direct follow-up Gallows, and then Cold makes up another favorite. But beyond that, it's just impossible to say. As an aside, Gallows, plus the interlude that works into it, being my favorite song, alongside Cold, like I said. These being my favorites are the only certain thing about this track list that I know about at this point. Those have been my two favorites since 2020, since the album dropped, actually, and it hasn't changed with the re-listen. They just stick out a little bit more above the others, so in that sense, they are standouts. But yeah, this entire record is just so good. Every single song is a standout. How much more I somehow loved these two songs than all the rest is the real surprising thing in some sense. But yeah, it's just worth listening to this whole thing front to back. And, you know, as another aside, a little postscript, I should say, I take back what I actually said earlier in the video about The Devil Exists being the best sounding Before I Turn record. It's actually this one. This is the best sounding Before I Turn record. And now, to close the video, as I finish the script, I yet debate, as I said before, that I could very well switch the virus and immoral and malevolent happenings in their spots, and I really had to fight with myself about how to order Claustrophobic and Lovelorn. I suppose being surprised by your own ranking is a good thing in some sense. It means that I have enough of an open mind to challenge my own presuppositions and opinions. I certainly did with this list. If you are also already a fan of Before I Turn, tell me how you'd rank their albums. I'd be curious to know, especially compared to how my recent experience just went. I had a phenomenal time revisiting their body of work at the end of February, reminding myself why there was a period of time where this artist was my very favorite. Maybe that'll happen again. I'm obsessed all over again. Just what a wonderful journey. Thank you for taking it with me in some sense. I hope to see you guys in the next video, right after you let me know your own Before I Turn discography rankings down in the comments.